Attorney General Sessions, welcome. And for all the people in the audience, we welcome you as well. I thank the General Sessions for being here for this oversight hearing. Oversight is just one of the critical functions and constitutional responsibilities of our branch. It's an opportunity for Congress to investigate and question the policies and actions of any executive branch. It's an opportunity for the executive branch to take responsibility for any of those policies and actions. And it's an opportunity for Congress to defend its constitutional powers and check any abuses by an overreaching executive branch, and it's been that way for 230 years. Some have complained that we haven't had an oversight hearing with this Attorney General earlier. My reason for deferring was that the Attorney General should have his team in place before appearing before us. Certainly Attorney General Holder and Attorney General Lynch did have their respective teams well in place by the time they appeared here as you are now here. The other side has been blocking executive nomination for the past 10 months, significantly delaying the Department of Justice's ability to get management in place and things in order. But we're here now and ready to do our oversight. The Department of Justice is an incredibly important part of the executive branch, enforcing laws and ensuring public safety against foreign and domestic threats, among a lot of other responsibilities. Our citizens look to the Department of Justice to provide federal leadership in preventing and controlling crime. We rely on the department to seek just punishment for those guilty of unlawful behavior and to ensure fair and impartial administration of justice. The department currently faces many difficult issues. Our country is challenged with the overgrowing threat of foreign or homegrown terrorism. We've seen terrorist incidents evolving around the world, especially impacting Europe. In the UK alone, there have been at least a half a dozen major terrorist incidents in the past 9 months. And I have a couple paragraphs here of other things that have gone on both in Europe and the United States that, to save time, I'm going to skip over. But there's been a lot of people killed, and terrorist attacks in the Western world are something that we ought to be very concerned about. They are real, and we must protect our country by lawful means. Congress has tried to do so by providing lawful authorities such as Section 702 of the FISA Amendment Act. Congress passed the legislation, and President Bush signed it into law 2008. After more debate and President Obama's support, Congress reauthorized the law in 2012 unchanged. The law is again up for reauthorization. Section 702 is scheduled to expire at the end of this year. It's up to Congress to reauthorize this important national security tool while preserving privacy and civil liberties and increasing transparency for the American public. General Sessions, I am interested in hearing your thoughts on that important legislation. In September, the FBI released its annual crime data. For the second year in a row, violent crime increased across the United States. Homicides, 8 6/10% increase. Cities like Baltimore, Chicago, Kansas City, Missouri have seen massive increases in homicide. Baltimore is on pace to top the number of homicides in New York City, even though the population is almost 8 million less. And this country continues to be mired in a national epidemic of overdose death and abuse of opioid drugs. Over 47,000 people died 2014. 50,000 died 2015. And last year, 64,000 people. Now that we have a new administration, I want to know what the Department of Justice is doing to reduce violent crime to help ensure that the citizens around the country are safe. I also want to find out what the department is doing to combat opioid crisis. And we all care deeply about this issue. The abuse of prescription painkillers, heroin, synthetic opioids, fentanyl as an example, are destroying lives and communities across Iowa and the nation as a whole. I know that it's a national issue. I co-sponsored the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, known as CARA. It passed through this committee, signed into law last year. CARA addresses the opioid crisis in a comprehensive way by authorizing almost $900 million over 5 years for prevention, education, recovery, and law enforcement. Just this past weekend, reports suggested that Congress gave a pass to big drug companies making prescription opioids by enacting the, quote, the Ensuring Patient Access and Effective Drug Enforcement Act, end of quote. DOJ and DEA last year signed off on this bill. Now former DEA employees are railing against the law, pointing fingers at lawmakers. If DEA had problems with this bill, they were the ones that could have had the expertise to warn Congress, and they didn't. The Obama administration actually provided language for the bill and signed it into law. I'm planning on having an oversight hearing that will include your department, General Sessions, to see what, if anything, needs changing. October 1, this country suffered through the deadliest mass shooting. And I don't need to go through the history of that, but it'll be in my printed statement. AFT has recently briefed the Judiciary staff on the addition to guns called bump stocks. We'll be looking more at that issue. In September, the President announced a wind down of the Deferred Action Against Childhood Arrival Program, DACA for short, with a 6-month extension. My office received preliminary data showing 2,021 individuals who had DACA status terminated for criminal gang activity. We want to know who these criminals are, what kinds of crimes they're committing, and if they're with any gangs. Separately, General Sessions, you announced earlier this year DOJ's recommitment to criminal investigation enforcement. 50 more immigration judges were supposed to be added to the bench this year and 75 more next year. We need to know what steps DOJ's taken and what still needs to be done to reduce this immigration court backlogs. There's another issue that I want to address that came up in the news just yesterday. In June 2015, and again last week, I wrote to the Justice Department about Russia's acquisition of uranium-1, which was approved during the last administration. That transaction resulted in Russians owning 20% of America's uranium mining capacity. It turns out that during the transaction, the Justice Department had ongoing criminal investigation for bribery, extortion, money laundering into officials for the Russian company making the purchase. Russians involved in the conspiracy were reportedly coordinating with high-level officials, some close to Vladimir Putin. While all of this was going on, the Clinton Foundation reportedly received millions of dollars from interested parties in the transaction. Then Secretary Clinton's State Department was one of the agencies that gave a thumbs up to the takeover. Somehow, despite all this, the previous administration approved the transaction. In my letter, I asked the agencies involved in approving the transaction if they were aware of the criminal probe and the intelligence operation examining Russian activity. This committee has an obligation to get to the bottom of this issue. The committee is also waiting for responses to 11 oversight letters sent to the Justice Department on matters from which the Attorney General is not recused. There are more letters that haven't been answered. The letters date back to January 2016. I expect these letters will be answered, including, most importantly, those from the previous administration. I also want to ask you about the firing of former Director James Comey. It was an important moment for the Department of Justice and for this country. The American people have a right to know why he was fired, especially in the middle of so many high-profile issues going on, including the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. So thank you, General Sessions, for being here and for your continued service to the country.